Hi, and welcome to another episode of I Remember Radio. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm Chuck Street, and today we're going to talk about an amazing story that has to do with how the great song Up, Up, and Away, written by Jimmy Webb and performed by the Fifth Dimension, came to be. And it very much involved the two people we have on our program today, and also a radio station, KMN 129 Radio, which is located in San Bernardino, California. So I thought I would take this opportunity for you to get a little bit acquainted with our two guests today. First of all, there's Steve Langjahr, and then second, there's Norton Grimm. These two guys have been friends since second grade, and they're still friends today, great friends. They have a lot of interesting experiences throughout their entire life. And they've always been interested in science-related things. In fact, Steve Langjahr, was an anatomy and physiology professor at Antelope Valley College in Lancaster, California. And then Norton Grimm was a physician's assistant for many, many years, working in the medical profession. Both of these guys are retired now, and thank goodness they're available to share some of their memories. Now, Steve, talk about how you two came together. I think you said second grade, and you were always interested in science-oriented things and probably involved in science fairs. And if you look up on the screen, you'll see an issue of Popular Science magazine. And this magazine actually kind of started your interest in hot air ballooning.
Certainly in hot air ballooning. This issue, which I see sold for 35 cents, was basically documenting the work that Ed Yost was doing in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He had basically reimagined the hot air balloon, which was basically extinct for 200 years. He brought together nylon and propane and essentially worked to make available what would later become sport ballooning. And this really jazzed us. We were into weather balloons and rocketry. This is a shot from '62. We were in junior high, I guess, and we were sending up capsules with cameras and so forth. But the idea of flying ourselves was pretty exciting. So naturally, we looked into getting into this and quickly found that it was out of our reach in terms of cost. But as luck would have it, Don Picard, who was working with Yost at the time, left Raven Industries, came to Costa Mesa and set up his own shop and started to manufacture what would become Picard balloons. And this was in, I'll say 66, 65. And so we sent him a letter with a few clippings of some of the things that we've done at that time. And he invited us back down to his shop, and we became kind of indentured servants. In other words, we were on call all the time, and he would say, "Be out at El Mirage Dry Lake tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the morning." And we'd be there. And we were getting trained in the Picard way. And so we felt we had some credentials. This photo up there now is one of our flights after we took ownership of what was originally the KMN balloon. That's flying out in Hemet, California. Norton in the middle and our friend Al Davis on the right.
But you two guys were really kindred souls. Again, you'd known each other since second grade. You were both interested in science projects. You collaborated in science projects. And then together you decided that you wanted to be a part of this emerging sport ballooning community. So,
yeah, Norton can elaborate on that, I suppose.
Yeah, Steve and I did have a shared interest in science. We, like Steve enlisted, we started out slow and This was, of course, in the 60s when we were in the process of trying to land a man on the moon. And Steve and I were fascinated with science. And so we decided that we wanted to start off. Obviously, rocketry was our initial induction into the process. And eventually we got interested in lighter than air ballooning. And from there, we got tired of launching Steve's sister's rat in a capsule that was never recovered. And we had lost a few other payloads that we decided it's time for us to start thinking about flying ourselves in a balloon. And it was a jump from that to the hot air balloon, but we initially filled up a hydrogen-filled balloon out in Ritchie Canyon, south of San Bernardino, California. And we structured it with a parachute to incorporate the envelope itself. And then we were going to attach a aluminum lawn chair to the balloon itself and go for short tethered flights. Unfortunately, our parents intervened and we were not allowed to do that. And we never did really get much of a altitude on the balloon. But again, it spurred our interest in lighter than air flight. And as it's already been mentioned before, we did at the same time notice that the recreational hot air ballooning was becoming a new era. And we obviously pursued that, as Steve has already elicited. And again, we've just had this long common, I always think of Steve, I have a twin brother, and there's a story about that later on, but Steve has always been my brother. And we just, I don't know what it is, but we've just remained friends for over 67 years.
Now, you guys were, you were starving college students, right? So you thought, okay, this buying a hot air balloon is not in our reach right now, but you wanted to get involved in it. So you got this idea to contact the #1 radio station in San Bernardino and Riverside, KMAN 129 radio, and then you sent as you said, a very primitive kind of proposal to the general manager at KMAN to see if perhaps they would be interested in purchasing a balloon and having you guys operate it for them. How did that happen?
Well, as you know, Chuck, KMAN was doing all kinds of stunts, the walkathon, build a thing. So this seemed like the crazy thing that would fit right in. So we banged out a letter on my mother's Royal typewriter, and we didn't have a photo of a balloon, so we actually drew a kind of conception of what it would be with the KMAN logo and sent it off, and didn't expect much to happen, but we got a call. Wow. And we walked into KMAN Studios and sat down with Jerry Jolstad, general manager. He was the quintessential manager. I remember this. He was leaning back in his leather upholstered chair, and he's the only guy that I know that could light a cigarette with one hand using a book of matches. He could take that match out of the book and strike it across the flint and light his cigarette with one hand. I was amazed. But more amazing than that is that he bought our story, and it was a story because we overstated our qualifications. We didn't have any ballooning license at the time. We had a few rides, you could say, with Picard, but we didn't have the credentials, but we said we did. And we proposed a small balloon, what's called an AX2, and that price tag would have been around $2,000 for KMAN. And we left the studio thinking that that's the way it was going to go, and we were thrilled at that. But As it turns out, Don Picard got in there without us, and nevertheless sold them a balloon that was twice the size, and came in, spent probably $3,500 for it, put their logo on it, and we became the lackeys, which would inflate it and do all the dirty work. But we were in charge of actually training William F. Williams, who, as this little ad said, was himself a licensed pilot of heavier than air, in other words, airplanes, I guess, had some marine experience in aviation, but a great guy. But in truth, then, it was the blind leading the blind. And we trained him. And then this fateful day, Saturday, January 21st, was the inaugural in the dirt lot next to Uncle Harry's Drive-In, a restaurant.
Now let's back up just a second. So that first meeting that you had with Jerry Jolstad, who was the general manager, William F. Williams was a part of that meeting, and he was a very popular disc jockey, and he was trying to look for ways to maybe enhance his own stature as a radio personality. And of course, Jerry Jolstad was always looking for opportunities to enhance the status of the radio station. So it sounds like William F. Williams was all in from the beginning, right?
Yeah, he was excited about it. And he took our claims at face value. And, we were pretty good at bluffing. We managed to have some good times in the effort of, quote, training him. Our first training flight was out in Palm Springs. And he was a quick learner. He never really pursued it. All he cared about was being able to manage the balloon and appear to be, in charge. But in reality, we never really flew it much for KMN. We can go into that, but at least he was on board from the beginning and a great supporter of the whole idea.
Now, you inflated the balloon a few times in the cow pasture next to the radio station, right? Came in, its offices and the transmitter site was in the middle of a cow pasture. And I think we're looking at some of those photos on the screen of when this would actually be the first real demonstration, right? So you inflated the balloon and William F. Williams was there. And so that was, the first time that they really actually probably had a chance to see the balloon as it was inflated. And then the appearance at Uncle Harry's Drive-In was to follow soon after that, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can see the KMN logo on that previous picture. And this is a shot in that cow pasture. Don Picard is hanging onto the basket there as we go over this chain link fence. And I'm in the basket, or Norton's in the basket, I don't remember. And Willie has his hand on the controls there, apparently on the left. And William F. Williams, is looking at the camera there in the second photo, holding something. But yeah, that was the first inflation of that balloon.
Now, so William F. Williams had a moniker, right? He had a moniker on the air and in all of their print stuff. And then he also had a name for the balloon, right?
Yes, it was called his Magnificent Flying Machine. Was that it?
That's what I remember.
Yeah. And it was all rather fanciful and fun. As you know, they were planning on giving balloon rides, tethered rides. That actually did work out a few times while KMN owned the balloon. But I guess we're building up to that night at Uncle Harry's. This is during the day. And Well, basically it was too windy, way too windy, but we felt compelled to try to inflate it. And this is a scene of that attempt, but we couldn't keep it upright. It's a bit like, I don't know, trailering in a sailboat into a parking lot and then hoisting up the spinnaker and expecting it to stay on the trailer. It was a tug of war, and well, we did some damage. You can even see some holes that were burnt into the lower panels there. So we gave it up or I should say that afternoon, and we resolved to try in the evening, which we did because it calmed down. This is a shot as we were deflating the balloon. This would have been afternoon. And so we tried in the evening and were successful because it had calmed down. And at that point, William F. Williams and Jimmy Webb, who was a fledgling songwriter and friend of Williams, the two of them were in the basket. And according to what Williams told me later, in actually 2004, Jimmy was struck by the incandescent glow of the balloon and the magical aura of the whole thing, and was enthralled enough to want to go out and fly again, free flight, which we did later. But the two of them are the only ones that really know the details of the writing of the song. And this email that I got from Williams in 2004 describes that. If you want me to elaborate on that at this point.
Yeah, please.
Well, it turns out that Williams was writing a screenplay for a movie that was kind of a boy meets girl thing. And it was, well, remember, this is the period of beach blanket bingo with Frankie Avalon and all of that. So it was a popular movie format, and he wanted a balloon to be kind of the centerpiece of this romance, rom-com, I guess. And he wanted Jimmy to write a song for it. He didn't have a title. Williams didn't have a title, but then, according to Williams, he came up with the title Up, Up and Away and said, Jimmy, I want you to write a song with that title. And according to Williams, he said, Jimmy said, what kind of a blank title is that? I can't write a song with that title. This was apparently on the campus of San Bernardino Valley College, where Jimmy was a student, music student, I understand. And he had access apparently to the music room, and he and Williams were sitting down one afternoon. And according to Williams, he said, Willie decided to go across the street and get some tacos and some Cokes. And it took him about 20 minutes to come back with the food. And when he had returned, apparently Jimmy played the song, having finished it in 20 minutes. So that was the composition of the song, as Willie describes it. And then the song was handed over to Johnny Rivers. I guess Jimmy was staying with Johnny Rivers in Hollywood, doing a lot of studio stuff. And Johnny gave the song to a group that was being put together at the time, which was the Fifth Dimension. And they recorded it under Johnny's label, which was Soul City. In fact, you see the album cover here. And notice that the album cover says Fifth Dimension, Up, Up and Away. And then as a subtitle, Go Where You Want to Go, which I guess was a cover song that had been recorded and written before. But according to Williams, Williams was working by this time at KCBQ in San Diego. And the record came out as a single, a 45. And actually Up, Up and Away was the B-side. But Williams, with his own intentions, decided to play the B-side instead of the A-side, whatever that was. And he got a lot of flack, according to Williams, from Johnny Rivers and the rest of the folks at Soul City. But then it caught on. And of course, the cliche is the rest is history.
Well, now there is a story with how that album cover was put together and how the photography took place. But before we get to that, I'd like you to share a story about something that happened out in Palm Springs. You were doing more training with William F. Williams. And Norton, at that time, not only were you a college student, but you also were in the Air Force Reserve, right?
Yes.
So you were in the Air Force Reserve, but you had a twin brother. Now you were tied up the particular weekend when you were going to do this training flight, but you didn't want to disappoint William F. Williams and the instruction he was supposed to get. So you were not there, but your twin brother was with
Correct.
Steve. And I don't know if Steve, you were there, if you'd like to pick up what happened then.
Well, Norton knows how it unfolded, talking or essentially reviewing that with his brother. His brother's name was Jeff, and Jeff had never seen or gotten near a hot air balloon, but yet he was impersonating Norton, who was a pseudo veteran.
Well,
Go ahead, Norton.
Jeff is an identical twin. And Steve and I thought we had this contractual arrangement with K-Man that it would be both of us attending to any kind of balloon training or flight or whatever. So therefore, when I went on active duty on a weekend for my Reserve Air Force, we felt we were going to be in violation of that contract. So we decided to go ahead and substitute my brother, as Steve has said, had no experience whatsoever in balloon, which was not a great deal because neither Steve or I had either. But at least we'd been up in a balloon before. So Jeff did kind of unwillingly or not voluntarily wise, but he did end up agreeing to go and substitute or pretend to be me rather than violate this contractual basis. It was kind of funny because later on I heard from William F. Williams that for years he had this disappointing or less than judgment or evaluation of my flying skills, because apparently while Jeff was instructing him, William F. Williams asked him a question and my brother answered honestly. He says, hell, I don't know. And he always thought that, boy, Steve knows a lot more about ballooning than this guy does. And anyway, it went on, but William F. Williams did not learn that until probably at least 20 years after the fact, if my memory serves me right. But that's the story about how dedicated Steve and I were to trying to obtain a balloon of our own.
Still, but you actually, there was some free flight there, right? I mean, the balloon was launched with William F. Williams and your brother Jeff, who hadn't a clue what he was doing, but he was letting, I guess, Williams kind of do the controlling, and he was supposed to be coaching Willie on what to do, but he was he was not doing a good job of impersonating you. But
no, actually, the agreement was that Jeff would not get in the basket under any circumstances, and that I was going to be on board. But we had landed. In ballooning, you typically make a number of short hops, and we were landing to change fuel tanks. And Williams said to Jeff, thinking he was Norton, Norton, it's time for you to go up with me. And so there's not much I could do at that point because it was a direct invitation. And so there they go, flying over this residential area in Palm Springs with power lines and all sorts of perils. And Jeff had never been in a balloon, didn't even know what was going on, tried to act like he did, I guess. And Williams was, at that point, probably had 20 minutes of balloon experience. So 20 plus 0 is still 20.
Now you talked about you do short hops. When you say change tanks, so you're changing propane tanks, which provide the fuel for the burners that produce the hot air that give you lift.
Right.
So
that's interesting, kind of an aside, but in the early years of hot air ballooning, when you landed, you invariably attracted 10 or 20 cars pulling over, thinking there had been an accident, or at least just being curious. And they'd run up to the basket, and we'd greet them with good friendship. But one of the questions they always ask, what's in those tanks? Is that helium? As if we were, getting helium out of these tanks and filling up this huge envelope. So that was always funny to us anyway. But in the early years, hot air balloons were a rare sight, and how they worked was a complete mystery to most people.
Yeah. So the single, in spite of the intentions of the record company, the single Up, Up and Away becomes a hit, a big hit. So they decide to do an album. So they need a photo, a cover on the album. And so you were contacted to be involved in that shoot. Can you explain what happened with that?
Well, apparently they didn't want to use the Cayman balloon because it was a little tattered at the point. It had been ridden hard, so to speak. They wanted a fresh balloon. And as it turns out, Picard had just finished the balloon you see here, Golden Bear, which is an exact replica or the same size as the Cayman balloon. And it was brand new. And the person who bought it, Tad Bridenthal, agreed to have Picard take it out and be a part of this promotion, which was basically a photo shoot for which they were both being paid. And this launch site there is right across from a hotel in Palm Springs. You can see the mountains in the background. And I can pretty much pick out who's there, other than Norton and I. Jim Webb's in the black shirt, and the shorter person to his left is Johnny Rivers. The rest of the folks were the Fifth Dimension, and Don Picard's in there somewhere. Now, the curious thing about this is that balloon, which is an AX-5, was rated, I suppose, for a maximum passenger load of maybe 450 pounds if you pressed it. In other words, no more than 3 people. So here you have the fifth dimension, which obviously is 5. And Ron Townsend, who you can see in this photo on the left, a pretty large person. And doing the math, I would say that there's probably 700 pounds represented there. And there's no way that that balloon could fly away with that kind of weight. So Piccard had figured out a way to get around it. He took the propane tanks out, which gave more room in the basket. And then he came up, he showed up with a 50-foot propane hose, 50 feet. And so he kept the tank on the ground. And so what we did was superheat the balloon with the fifth dimension on board. And by that, I mean, we heated it just to its maximum before the fabric would start falling apart. And then all of the people standing around, what we did is we just shoved the balloon up in the air, and it reached an altitude of about 20 feet before it came crashing down. But this shot is at about 20 feet. And it looks like they're flying away and having a great time, which was the intent. So yeah, it's a pretty good picture, actually. But it was a little bit dicey in terms of getting it all to happen. Luckily, there was no wind and we got away with it.
Well, again, just a technical thing. When you're inflating a balloon to get buoyancy, you're trying to have a differential between the outside temperature and the inside, the envelope temperature. And of course, you're in the desert for the shot, right? So you really had to really heat up that air inside the envelope just to get any lift at all, right? So that had to be a challenge in the desert environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, the balloon had what's called a red line, an absolute red line of 300 degrees. And we pushed that envelope. But I wouldn't say we got any positive buoyancy. We just got enough so that we could manage to essentially slingshot them off the ground. And there probably would have been some injuries if we hadn't been there to catch them on the way down. But they were all having a good time. They're naturally worried about, you know, the photo, which came out fine and obviously made the cover and made the song. I guess you know that song won 6 Grammys in 1968, which was the 10th actual Grammy awards. And that's pretty amazing. It won Best Performance by a Vocal Group. And what's interesting about that is that some of the contenders, one of the contenders was the Beatles singing Sgt. Pepper's. So that's a pretty incredible competitive victory, I guess you could say. And I think it's fair to say that it launched Jim Webb's career and the Fifth Dimension for that matter.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I'm sorry to digress, but my wife and I, Jeanette, we were watching a show on YouTube, Best Songs of the 60s. And it went through 60, 61, 62, right on down the line. And when it hit 67, it didn't even mention Up, Up and Away. But when they got to 68 and 9, they focused on the Fifth Dimension, who at that point had released Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In. So it's just curious that a song that swept the Grammys basically is rarely heard of, at least in terms of airplay these days.
Well, I wonder if the song Up, Up and Away would have ever happened had you two not met each other in the second grade. It's interesting how something that started as innocent as that led to the inspiration for a song that was a smash hit in 1967.
Well, I don't take any credit, obviously, except that you're right. Without the balloon, it would be hard to write Up, Up and Away.
Something else interesting was after the success of Up, Up and Away, we ran into Jimmy Webb maybe a year or two later, and I jokingly asked him if Steve and I were going to get any royalties off of the song and the record cover. And I remember looking at Jimmy Webb looking at me saying, "Did you write the song?" And I said, "No." I thought that was an excellent comeback.
Yeah.
Well, this photo you have up there now took place in Paris, California in 1968, June of 68. And this is at what was the trolley museum out there in Paris. This is where we would fly and did a lot of training. Anyway, the Cayman balloon at this point owned by us because we bought it subsequently from the station known as KCBQ, who became the second owner of that balloon. But anyway, from left to right here, Don Picard, then there's Norton in the basket. My back is turned, and then there's Mel Ferrer and Howard Golden, William F. Williams, and on the extreme right there is Jim Webb. Now, why were we out here? Well, because of the success of Up, Up and Away, Universal Studios wanted to capitalize on the popularity of the group. And so they were going to do a TV special with the title Up, Up and Away, I guess. And they needed a balloon because the balloon that we had was not capable of lifting the whole group by any means. So they commissioned Picard to make a larger balloon, twice as large. And so this ceremony, if you want to call it, was to celebrate the intention of making that balloon, which did get built. But we were celebrating the probable development of that special. Now, in truth, that special never happened. And that balloon that was built, we kept in our garage for 5 years. And then told Universal, "Hey, you have a balloon. You may not know it, but we'd like to buy it," which we did. But the signature here is Jimmy's autograph. And I showed him this photo. Actually, my wife and I, Jeanette, went to a performance of Jimmy's down in Hollywood. And during the break, it was a small venue. There was probably, 70 people. And we went down there just to hear Jimmy's music. And I remember telling Jeanette, I bet he's not going to play Up, Up and Away. And guess what the first song he played was? Anyway, during the break, I showed him this picture. And he had never seen her before. He had to admit that was him. and Williams, but I don't know if he remembered the occasion. But he was kind enough to autograph it for me. And that's how that picture came about. But the special, the TV special, was never filmed. I don't know why.
But you were able to buy the balloon at a much discounted price, right? They just wanted to get it off of their books.
That balloon that was commissioned or built for that purpose was probably sold to Universal for around, I'll say, 6,000 to 7,000, which is a lot of money at the time. And in fact, that balloon was a huge balloon for the time.
Mhm.
But nothing happened. So we kept it in our garage, Norton's garage, actually. And our strategy was, okay, let's just hold on to this. And then at some point, we'll write him a letter and say, you owe us a bit for storage.
You guys are bold.
But the funny thing is, we called up Universal and we couldn't find anybody at Universal that knew anything about the balloon because they had all left. Finally, they called us back and said, yeah, I guess we do own that thing. Would you be interested in buying it? And we said, well, how's $1,000 sound? And that was better than nothing. So that's how we ended up with that balloon. In fact, that's the exact same price we paid for the Cayman balloon, which is a different story. This is a shot of the logbook. And up in the upper left, you can see the year was 67. And I think it says July 6th. I can't really make it out. It might have been May 6th.
I'll tell you real quick.
Oh, Norton's
You
got
have
the
it.
logbook.
He's got it.
But
I see Jimmy Webb's signature in the lower right corner of that logbook.
It's September 17th.
I'll be darned.
oh, that's the flight at the bottom, which was one that we took Williams and Skip Mosier and everybody listed there. But what's curious about this, if you look up the page, my solo was on July 13th of that year, which was well after we had done this inflation for Uncle Harry's. And then Norton's solo was, what was that date there in the extreme top, Norton?
May 6th.
All right, so if we put this into perspective, the Uncle Harry's things was in January, and neither Norton and I had soloed in hot air ballooning until much later that year. Of course, that wasn't widely known. But,
Well, I guess it's a great example of you fake it until you make it, right?
that's it. We're not
We're
really
just
making it,
making
we're
it.
just faking it.
So
And
all these
apparently-
years later, are you still flying?
Oh, well, we are. As you know, we had a 50-year reunion of balloonists recently in Indianola, and
Iowa.
Indianola, Iowa, which was the site of the National Balloon Championships for a number of years, starting in 1970. So it was quite a feat to get balloonists of that period back in Indianola. Many of them passed away. But of course you were there, Chuck, and Norton as well. And we had a grand old time being back at a spot that you figured you'd never revisit. So it was quite emotional for, I think, everybody that came back.
For sure. So anything you guys want to add before we conclude? Steve?
Well, I'm grateful for Norton's friendship, your friendship, Chuck. Maybe this is a little off topic, but Chuck and Norton and I met on the campus of San Bernardino Valley College, as Norton and I were pitching a balloon promotion for the homecoming football game. And Chuck, you were there, of course, I know. And I think you were in the radio department. And after our sales pitch, you invited us to interview on air on the San Bernardino Valley College, I guess it's an FM station. And you'll have to answer this, but I guess you were excited enough about ballooning that you joined up with us. And for years and years, you were part of our, I don't know, entourage.
Yeah.
And in fact, you went and became the media coordinator for the National Balloon Championships in Indianola for a couple of years with your radio background and your aviation background. So it's no exaggeration to say that, you know, our friendship has endured for reasons other than ballooning, I'm sure, and happy to say that. But those were the years when we were doing some pretty stupid stuff. But when ballooning is so young and so new, it didn't seem like there was anything that couldn't be done until you found out it wasn't a good thing to do.
And you survived, but
yeah, I guess
I remember that.
We did survive and still enjoy the sport quite a bit. And there's something magical and, well, really attractive and serene about flying a balloon that can't be duplicated in any other sport. And sadly, it's lost its luster in terms of, I don't know, popularity among new people, young people. So maybe that's just because there are too many other high intensity sports for them to get injured in. So yeah. Ballooning is just too placid, too serene, I guess. But as you know, it's a sport that requires a lot of dedicated people. You can't just pull it out of the bag and inflate it by yourself. So it takes a lot of friends, and that's the camaraderie and the adventure of ballooning, because it's always involving interesting people, interesting places, unknown destinations, and always an element of surprise in terms of how the day ends up. So it's a great sport and deserves all the romantic references that sometimes are heaped on it.
Norton, anything you wanted to say as we conclude, because you've been a part of this all along?
Well, Steve elicited pretty much exactly the same sentiments I have, and I guess it's the, you know, it's just more than just recreational sport for Steve and I. It's almost a way of living. We just enjoyed it so much. I'm not only a lighter than air balloon pilot, I'm also a fixed wing pilot. And the two of them, there's no comparison. And I guess, like Steve said, the tranquility of ballooning, it's a sensation that once you feel that, you're addicted. You're hooked for the rest of your life. It has that magical power on you. And everybody that we've ever flown with, both civilian and other professional balloonists, have that same initial feeling. And it's just something that gets into your blood and you cannot change it. So we've enjoyed the ride, and I've certainly enjoyed the friendship that I've had with Steve, as well as you, Chuck. And, you know, I no longer qualified to fly, either fixed wing or lighter than air, but I enjoy flying occasionally with Steve whenever that's possible. So I appreciate the continued love of the sport.
Good. Well, listen, thanks to you both. You definitely were a part of history that helped launch the career of the amazing Jimmy Webb, and that amazing song that had a huge impact. And it's great to hear the behind the scenes story of how it all came to be. Thank you both so much.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Chuck. Good seeing you.
Yes.